Hi there guys, I just wanted to make a quick video about my DeathAdder V2 because I've been using it again, and in particular I wanted to talk about why and compare it against kind of the other ergos that I have. So I like to box my mice up when I'm not using them just because then I can store them for later and they don't get damaged and things like that. But so here's the thing, I am seemingly, from what I read, in the minority on this, in that I like the DeathAdder V2 a lot, and I like it more than the V3 when it comes to purely palm grip comfort in the hand. And I think that's the thing this mouse does exceptionally well that a lot of people don't give it credit for. And what I have noticed in other reviews for the DeathAdder V2, and why so many people seem to have a really big distaste for this shape, or maybe not a distaste, maybe that's too harsh, but a preference for other ergos, is that they are not holding the mouse the way that I do, or perhaps alternatively their hands are just a different size. Maybe their hands are smaller. So what I mean by that is I fully agree with the notion that something like, the EC2 is, I find, much more comfortable to claw grip than the DeathAdder V2. The V3 I find more comfortable to claw grip than the V2, right? So in that sense, I get where people are coming from. If you aren't, kind of palming the mouse, or tilt grip palming the mouse, then I understand those arguments. But here's the thing. So how do I hold the mouse? I have 19.5 by 10.5 centimeter hands, okay? How I like to hold mice is to take this part of my fingers and I align it to the peak of the mouse hump, and I just kind of rest my fingers down. And I do a little bit of a tilt grip where instead of centering on the shape like this, I make my thumb kind of go straight under the button. So a little bit of a tilt grip to it, I suppose, but that's basically how I hold it, like this. For this type of grip, specifically this type of grip, this is by far the most comfortable shape that I have ever used. And I keep coming back to it for that reason. I've been trying to switch to another mouse because I'm afraid this won't last, right? Like, I think that they're clearly committing to this sort of design direction where they're making their mice more like the EC2 kind of shape, where it's a little less controversial. And that's why I've been trying so hard to get used to other mice like the Outset or the EC1 and things like that. And I guess the EC1 is probably the most similar-ish. I mean, that or the V3, but they really don't feel the same in the hand. And in particular, okay, what do I like about this shape so much that the other mice aren't doing? So so what I find on like the EC2 or the EC1, for example, is when I hold it, my fingers almost want to do this. Like, they almost want to like wrap under the shape. It just doesn't feel quite as natural. And I think part of that might be the way they position the mouse hump on this seems to be, slightly different. And then it's wider in the back going in this direction. I also think the rubber grip on the right side, your fingers can kind of latch onto that, and then they, don't curve under. So for however they've done this shape, I just find it feels more natural to me to rest my hand like this. And I would say this is the only mouse, other than, possibly the Naga, and that's because the Naga has like the finger ledge and is clearly like a dedicated sort of palm shape, or it's really good for it at least. But it's one of the only mice I have used that truly feels invisible to me once I start using it in terms of comfort in my hand. All of the other ones feel kind of awkward to me, and I've kind of come full circle on why that is. In terms of, when I first looked at EC2, I thought, oh, well, this seems, this is probably like a palm grip type mouse, and that they were going for it. I don't think that's true anymore. I think for a lot of them, you can tell that they were built first and foremost for claw. And I think perhaps why there's been a industry shift towards that direction is because many tech reviewers use claw grip, a lot of esports players use claw grip, and I think they get used to that first because you know, when you're looking at competitive things, you think lightweight is good. And so they end up going for these kind of smaller, maybe lightweight mice. And if you have big hands, the only way you can really use those is by using a type of claw. And it's not that I think claw is bad on this mouse. It's just I think it's not as comfortable to claw this mouse versus those. And a lot of the design decisions start to make sense when you think about claw, because when they're a little more narrow, like I find if a mouse is really wide and you're trying to claw it, it can feel a little bit awkward in your hand. The sticky coatings, like the gluey kind of sticky coatings that they use on these, I think it makes sense specifically in the context of claw, because you only have a few contact points and your hand is basically staying in the same position all the time. But for this kind of grip, you know, I want to be able to throw my mouse around things, and I have a strong preference for like a more matte, less sticky, less gluey kind of coating, like on the white version of the DeathAdder V3 specifically, or the V2 DeathAdder. You know, and this little flare out at the back. I find personally on a lot of mice, I almost prefer this to be more, this part to be more straight and then this part to be more pronounced, because I want something to wrap my fingers around for my palm grip. And I don't necessarily want to tilt the mouse. It's just this sort of forces you to get your hand to align in between the buttons. But for claw, it makes a ton of sense, because I always complain all the time about how, okay, well, when I hold a mouse like this, you basically get one side button, because it's really awkward to shift your entire grip forward to reach this button. And that's true on basically all these. Some of them are a little better. The EC2 I think is a little better because it's just a smaller mouse, and you know, so I don't have a terrible time reaching this button in that grip, which is really nice. But again, that positioning makes perfect sense if you claw, because suddenly, right, like it all makes sense. So you have this, you know, you have these contact points for your hand in a claw grip, and I think that's why they're doing it. This mouse was almost my main, but over time there are a few things that I consider to be really fatal flaws for it that I am just stupefied nobody is talking about, or I shouldn't say nobody, but and okay, I think the reason why nobody's talking about it, again, comes down to claw grip. You don't run into this problem if you are a claw gripper, so it just doesn't bother people. This edge here at the top, I don't think this ledge extends far enough. If you look at the G502 from Logitech, you'll notice this right click extends a little bit further than the left click, right? Why does that make sense? Well, I'll show you why. It's because normally your middle finger is longer than your pointer, right? And so in that sense, if you're holding the shape dead on, you actually would want your right click to extend a little bit further, which is why I assume that they do that. So my problem with this shape, less so on this one because I just don't reach it as often, right? Like you can see where my fingers are positioned, they're not quite on the edge. What I found on the V3 was that this finger would rest on this harsh edge all the time when I was palming it. That feels like crap. And the thing is, it makes no sense to me, right? Because they were clearly inspired by the EC2, you know? Vaxi and Zowie get this right and have gotten it right forever. I don't know what Razer's obsession with like harsh edges is. It doesn't feel good if you're somebody where your fingers rest on this edge. But again, I think it comes down to testing and building primarily for claw grip, because you don't really run into it in that case. And I'll show you, like if you're clawing, look where your fingers contact. It's obviously, this is a slightly different mouse, but the concept is similar, right? When I hold this one, if I claw it, this edge doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter at all that this doesn't extend further. So I think they could have solved that either by doing the 502 thing where they just lengthen out the right click for people that want to hold the mouse that way. But they absolutely should have rounded this off. And I don't know why this side goes out further than the right side, because if anything, it's the right side that should go out further than the left side. And that's what I think about it anyway. If they had done that, this would probably be my main right now, but I still have some nitpicks with the shape. For me, I think the whole back hump area is still more comfortable on the V2 if you are specifically holding the mouse this way. And I also really don't like, personally, that they went from the white version, the white wireless version of this that I have, has like a chalky matte shell. I really like that material. But they changed it on the wired one where it's all gluey and sticky like a Zowie coating, and I don't like that one bit. And I wish they hadn't done that for this. You know, so again, I have to say I prefer the shell material on the V2. And now I'm going to rip into this mouse a bit, because the tragedy of the DeathAdder V2 to me, and really this shouldn't have been called a DeathAdder. This should have been called like the Mamba successor or something, right? Because this is a good mouse. maybe even a great mouse if you get a good quality control unit. I've had many problems with quality control on these units, and again, I don't understand. Like, I don't know, maybe some reviewers just got lucky with their mice that they got. That's possible. But all right, what are my gripes with this mouse? The tragedy of the V2 to me is that this mouse, they could have done so much with this shape to make like a DeathAdder successor, right? And you know, so okay, start with the obvious. Why is this black bar so huge? It makes no sense. You know, the further back you put these buttons, the harder they are to actually reach in game with either of your fingers. This is something that was actually kind of a regression from the Elite, because on the Elite, these didn't take up all this extra space and the buttons were pushed right up against the wheel. So the first thing you can do just at a glance, shorten up this black bar to these size buttons and push it up against the wheel. I like having these here because even though, you know, it doesn't hurt anything, right? Like I don't use these for DPI switching. I use them for like buttons in games. So like I'll bind it to a map or something like that. But in any case, I think that takes up too much space. But one of the problems I have is when I hold the mouse, I personally would have liked them to sort of elongate this front portion, just keep it going down slightly further out. And that's because some people do hold the mouse straight on, and some people choke up on the mouse a lot more than me, and you don't want their fingers coming off the end, right? So you can leave the entire shape completely unaltered, and then just lengthen out the front slightly like this. Bam, like that's a problem solved for some grip types. The other thing they should do is I actually wouldn't mind them kind of straightening out the flaring here at the front. I like having the wide front just because I have some thick boy fingers and it's pretty comfortable to rest them down. That's my view on it. Some people don't like them, but what I do think is crazy is Razer's obsession with these harsh corner edges under the click. That is just bad design. And it's bad design because for anybody that holds the mouse like dead on, like if your finger's on this corner, just feels so terrible. And it's one thing I complimented the outset about is if you are someone that holds the mouse dead on and your finger rests on the edge, it feels much less awkward because of how they've rounded it. And even, you know, Zowie's, they also have the rounded corner. And I think it maybe feels slightly more awkward than Vaxie's implementation because it sort of goes in and then out again, and you can feel that, whereas Vaxie's sort of goes, you know, just gradually inwards, and it's really nice. But so those are a few things they could fix on this. The other problem I had with this shape is just the button placement, right? Like I complain about this constantly, but you get one side button and then you get another side button if you're willing to shift your entire grip forward, and it just feels like crap. So what I wanted them to do is to rotate these buttons backwards along the hump, just so that they're positioned closer to the hump, and maybe make them the same size while you're at it. Even if that means cutting down on the vertical height of the buttons to accomplish it, I think it would be worth it. If they did those things, all the things I'm describing, oh, and then a unibody shell, like, you know, Vaxie does a great job with this, with their unibody shells. Having these hard connecting lines just isn't great anymore in current year. Other mice have done it better. Their new mouse actually does that better, where the connecting lines are very subtle. And then also split trigger switches. If they had a good split trigger switch implementation, that would be great. But you can see there's like a whole wish list of things that they could have done with this mouse and this shape. And this is one of the most popular mice ever made, right? Like that's why I'm so surprised that they would abandon it, because I mean, I don't know what the best-selling mouse of all time is, but this and the 502 are up there, you know? And, you know, there was so much room for this shape to grow. There were so many things they could do with it to make it better. So I'm hopeful that eventually someday Razer will give us like a DeathAdder Classic or something like that with all the things I'm talking about. It probably won't happen, unfortunately. And even if they do make another one, they probably won't fix the things I'm talking about, which is a little unfortunate. But, oh, and, you know, they also could tilt their cable upwards like Zowie does. I mean, there's lots of things they could learn from Zowie. And, you know, I always say the EC2 is like, it might be the safest shape in the entire world, because I feel like you could use this virtually no matter what your hand size and grip style is. Like you could find a way to use it sort of comfortably. For me, because I have a specific hand size and a specific way I like to hold mice, this is just the most comfortable one of the lot. And, you know, I'm just disappointed with the V3. It's a good mouse, but it's not a DeathAdder, and it has some oversights in terms of attention to detail that don't make sense. like this corner and like how it doesn't extend as far as this one, which basically means that if you are holding the mouse in this fashion, where you're holding it dead on and choking up on it, you're going to have this problem, and that sucks. And that can be a problem on this one too, if you hold the mouse that way. But usually I hold it like this, so my fingers just miss it, which is nice. But the other thing I noticed was the wheel on the V3 sucks compared to the wheel on the V2. You can go back and forth. My wheel on this wired unit is so much louder, and it feels really hollow and flimsy. You can't really feel the defined steps very well. I don't think it's a good wheel. This wheel has a much more pleasing sound and has better defined steps. I think it's a great hybrid wheel for you know, browsing and gaming. And you know, I think specifically for gaming, the EC2 wheel might be my favorite because I never miss scroll when I'm hitting the middle click, and you get these chunky defined steps that feel like you're pressing a button, which is awesome for gaming. The problem is it's a sucky browsing wheel. So if you want like a good hybrid, this is the best wheel ever, at least that I've used so far. And, you know, maybe I got lucky on my unit and there's some variance between them, who knows. But, you know, I'm just sad because I feel like once this mouse goes, like, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to move to something else. And, you know, the EC1, okay, here's the thing with the EC1. The EC1, it is nice that they round the corners in the front, but it is a little bit too large for me to hold comfortably and like in a weird way. So how your hand sits on this mouse hump, like it's so important for how natural it feels, you know? This mouse hump, it feels too tall for me. And then the way my fingers wrap around it, again, it's like they want to wrap under on the EC1. It's not quite as natural feeling. Now, this is a more comfortable mouse by far, I think, if you choke up on the mouse a lot and you're holding it dead on instead of tilt gripping, because then you know, it's a little bit longer, so your fingers don't come off the end, and it's a little less awkward feeling when this finger has to rest on the hard edge. All right, so I do think this is a good option. This is probably the sort of closest to this one. And I say this all the time in my videos, but the EC2 is a little too small for me. The EC1's a little too big. And, you know, if Zowie made an EC2L, which is like an EC 1.5, where it's in between these two in size, this mouse is far bigger than this one when you have them side by side. And I definitely think there's room in between them for one. If they made an EC2L in between these two in size, and then they replaced their shell material and coating with something like the white matte chalky DeathAdder V3, or something like the Superlight, where it's that soft touch rubberized shell, you know, that would probably be the one I end up maining, just because, you know, even if I would sort of prefer this shape, I think the way they position their side buttons is a little better on this one, and they do round the corners, which is really nice, and I love their wheel. But anyway, I'm sad because I've spent so much time trying to like move on, since they're just not gonna do this shape anymore. And I don't know, that really makes me sad, because I don't think it was all hype, you know? Like, I feel like the sentiment I see online a lot for mouse review and forums and their tech reviewers is that many people don't like this mouse. And again, I think that probably comes down to, you have to have a certain kind of hand size, and then you have to probably hold it in a specific way. Or I can definitely see the shape being more controversial than some of these other ones. But it, you know, for people like me, this mouse is fantastic in terms of ergonomic comfort specifically. It has other problems. My God, it has other problems, and it has a lot of room for improvement, which is why it's tragic. I think that they're, you know, not going to do that, seemingly. But I don't know. Maybe I'll just use this till I run it into the ground, and we'll see what I do from there. But it's also possible that on the V4, what they need to do on the V4 for me to use it is, you know, I think this side should, if anything, should be shorter than this side, because again, your middle finger is longer than your pointer finger. And then I think they really need to round this harsh edge. If they did that, I think it would probably be enough for me to use it. One of the things I've noticed on the smaller ergos, like the EC2, is that that problem I talked about with the fingers wrapping under is so much worse if you're trying to palm one of these smaller mice. And, you know, on this one, the left side sits a little bit higher up. And then they also have this ledge kind of on the bottom side that kind of catches your fingers. So I did think they did a decent job with that for this shape. This is a good mouse. I don't want to be too hard on it for that reason, but you know, it's not a DeathAdder. That's the thing, right? Like, this is Razer's attempt at a Zowie EC2 clone, and they even screwed that up because they didn't learn lessons from the Zowie design in terms of rounding their corners, and the build quality on it is pretty questionable. So I have two of these. I have a wired one and a wireless one now, and they both have different problems. My white wireless one has a horrible back side button. It just feels terrible. This one does not have that problem, but this one has like a really bad feeling left click that honestly feels worse than this left click, which is kind of astonishing to me. So and then, you know, I made a video already about the problems with the hyper-polling dongle. So I just think they need to sort out their QC. They need to refine their design. If they just lengthened out the right side slightly and round the corner, like, I would say I wouldn't have anything meaningful, and then obviously fix their QC. I wouldn't have anything meaningful to complain about on this shape. But anyway, I don't know. I keep coming back to this mouse because it's so dang comfortable. Like, this feels so natural to me, and like, I feel like I can aim it super well. You've got this wide front end for my thick fingers. You know, you've got so much support on this back end, and you know, I'm just heartbroken to see this shape die because I do like it a lot. And I think this was not a mouse for people that like the DeathAdder. This was a mouse for critics of the DeathAdder, and even then they still kind of flub certain parts of it. So I don't know. That bums me out, man. Oh, quick note about the outset. So the thing with the outset that I have noticed. So this is a great mouse. I think it's a very solid, considerable option. I love their click solution and everything. What I've noticed about this shape is that when I'm holding the mouse the way that I like to, it's comfortable for me, there's something about the raised back hump that just, it feels sort of awkward to me, and I've had a hard time getting used to it. And it's because the back end of the outset is very raised and almost tilted, which you can see with the bottom piece. Right? So like this thing. And that just feels sort of awkward to me. I think it does a good job keeping your fingers, you know, from wrapping under, and I generally feel like I have enough space to rest them. But the problem with the mice that are like that is then you always feel like your fingers are dragging on the mouse pad, and that's not comfortable. So I don't know. For people like me, I want mice to come out that are unique and are nice for palming. Like, one of the things I don't like about the direction that mice have been going is they're just homogenizing, right? Like, people are looking at the EC2, other companies are, and they're just like, well, let's just do that. And it's like, the EC2 already exists. If I wanted an EC2, I can get an EC2. Like, this was a unique Ergo mouse that is different. And I just don't like everything becoming like everything else. And I gotta say, to Vaxi's credit, they have not cloned the EC2. It has some things in common with it, but it is a very different shape when you hold it in your hand. And anyway, I don't know. I'm just demoralized because I still find this mouse to be the most comfortable. My searching has led me nowhere. But anyway, I also rather like the Naga because of the finger ledge. But anyway, thank you for your time, and have a good one. Hopefully my rambling assists some of you out there in making a decision about what mouse you want to use. So, bye guys.